Let's bring in Republican Senator James Lankford of Oklahoma. He's a member of the Senate Intelligence and Homeland Security Committees, and you're from Oklahoma.
I am.
This is the Oklahoma Attorney General who's now going to be nominated by the president-elect to take over the EPA. As critics point out, he is a climate change denier. What do you see as his vision for the EPA?
Well, let me start by saying Scott Pruitt is not only a good guy, he's a friend. And I listened to the report and get a chance to watch it. He sued the EPA 12 times because they weren't following the law. That was the issue. The main focus that I've heard from Scott over and over again is not an issue of trying to tear down the environment or not being environmentally conscious. Is the EPA has a responsibility. That's outlined in law. And where EPA has exceeded that law and gone beyond it to create regulations that violate the law, they should be held to account on it. Most of the laws that we deal with clean water and clean air, have a state requirement that the state is responsible to do a portion, the federal government is responsible to do a portion. What the EPA has tried to do the last 8 years is to do the state's job. And where Scott has pushed back over and over again is not to get rid of environmental regulations. It's to say the federal government should do its job, the states should do their job, and when they cooperate together, it works. Quite frankly, Oklahoma has one of the highest portfolios in the country of renewable energy. And that report talked about how much oil and gas we produce. That's true. 20% of our energy is wind power. Now, we have much higher wind distribution in our state than most any other state in the country. So we are truly an all of the above state, and that's happened in just the last 8 years as well.
You know him well, obviously.
I do know
You're both
him well.
from Oklahoma. You've worked with him. Do you believe he doesn't believe in climate change, that humans have a role in the climate?
I think his statement that came out there was pretty clear to say there's a lot of dispute on what the effect of man is and how great that is, and that is true. And even what happens now with what we do in America, there's all this great conversation about if we do all these limits in all these different ways, if we try to abide by this pact or this pact, what effect will that have? Because America is not the leading producer of that. Obviously, China, India, all those others are. He has said over and over again, this is a policy issue that should be determined by Congress, not by the EPA.
The other charge against him, and you're hearing it all day today, he's really way too close with the oil industry. The energy industry takes money from them for his campaigns. You saw that New York Times report that he basically forwarded a letter that a lobbyist for the oil industry wrote to the EPA challenging some issue.
Well, if he agreed with the letter and they sent it over, I just don't see the issue with that. To say this is a letter, he agreed with it, can send it on.
He made when they get a letter, it looks like it's coming from the Attorney General of Oklahoma, as opposed to where it originated, the oil the lobby, if you will.
Sure, and as that report even said, about 17% of his donations came in his last campaign from oil and natural gas. Quite frankly, if you came to Oklahoma, you'd find a tremendous number of companies, both very small and large, that are oil and natural gas. So a 17% of his campaign based on companies, which is a major employer in Oklahoma, doesn't surprise me.
Do you think he will try to dismantle almost all of the EPA? You heard the soundbite from the president-elect during the campaign. He'd like to dismantle almost all of the EPA.
Here's what I would think Scott's going to do. Scott's going to follow the law. And where I think there are a lot of Democrat colleagues that are frustrated is the last 8 years, the EPA has not followed the law. That's how they've been in so many lawsuits and lost those lawsuits. Many of those suits have gone all the way to the Supreme Court, and even the Supreme Court has said to the administration, you've overstepped your boundary. EPA does not have the right to do that. So I expect Scott to follow the law.
Senator, your understanding is he will follow the law, he will implement the law and all the regulations that are part of the laws that are currently in place.
I have no doubt Scott will follow the law, and he'll actually practice and follow through. But what I don't expect him to do is to exceed the law, and that's what the EPA has done the last several years.
Let's talk about John Kelly, who's been nominated, retired general, to be Secretary of Homeland Security, third general, now in a sensitive national security, Homeland Security position in the incoming Trump administration. Are you okay with all these generals coming in? Does that bother you at all?
No, it doesn't bother me to have leadership. Obviously, they're stepping in not as a general, they're stepping in a civilian position. They've had great military experience. Our country has tremendous respect for these leaders and what they have done in leading people, in leading large organizations. It doesn't bother me for them to be able to step in. And General Kelly was a tremendous leader for Southcom. In fact, in his leadership, just in drug interdictions and what happened in the Atlantic and the Gulf area, he literally in his work there was chasing the drug interdiction to the Pacific side. Now most of the drugs that are moving to the United States move in the Pacific rather than the Atlantic because of his leadership and for what he did to protect the nation and our security.
And it doesn't bother you that the president-elect is interviewing an Admiral Stavridis, the former NATO Supreme Allied Commander, maybe for Secretary of State, General Petraeus, also maybe for the Secretary of State. That doesn't bother you?
Doesn't bother me. Again, our nation always looks for good leaders in our military leaders. If they were a good leader and they did well there. They've retired and they're in their civilian position. They're civilians now.
You want to tell us who you want to be the Secretary of State?
Oh, there's about, I think, 300 people in the running now. I don't have a pick on it, but there are a lot of folks that are being floated and discussed on that. I'll let the president-elect be able to tap his cabinet.
All right, Senator, we have more to discuss, including North Korea. There are new threats emerging even as we speak right now. Much more with the senator right after this. James Lankford of Oklahoma, key member of the Intelligence and Homeland Security Committees. I want to talk about Russia, North Korea. North Korea first. How close is North Korea to actually deploying a nuclear weapon?
And North Korea has been testing over and over again for the last several years, not only underground testing, missile testing, and we know the focus for North Korea has been to be able to launch a intercontinental ballistic missile, whether they can get to the United States, obviously try to get to South Korea, to Japan, and try to broaden their range on there. There's been no secret on that, and they've made that very clear.
Because I've heard from some experts who are deeply worried about North Korea that within a few years, they could have maybe 50 or even 100 nuclear bombs. What are you hearing?
They have continued to be able to push their proliferation. There's been, no secret of this. As they do their testing, they're also advancing how they're getting a chance to gather nuclear material. So for North Korea and what they actually have right now, and for their testing capability, we can tell from their testing what they're able to do. But we don't know what they're able to do next, because that will be the next test that's actually coming out.
Because South Korea right now, a key U.S. ally, I understand they're extremely nervous about this potential threat from North Korea, and they see some North Korean cyber attacks against South Korea that are very alarming. What are you hearing?
So you have testing from North Korea for nuclear testing. You have advanced actions that are happening both on the ground and military, and their own displays of their military power. North Korea reaching into South Korea with a cyber attack to be able to attack the cyber command in South Korea. You have instability in South Korea right now with President Park going through a massive corruption scandal, and they're being challenged by their own parliament on impeachment right now, actually. Real conversations, if not impeached, to resign in April, transition with the prime minister that would be next after the president, and dispute about who that prime minister would be if they have to trade that off. This is a very unstable time on that peninsula, and it's a time for America to continue to express to the South Korean people that we are your ally and we'll continue to be able to stand with you, and North Korea should not make advances.
Yeah, we spent a lot of time here in the Situation Room reporting on this North Korean threat. Let's talk about Russia. Do you accept the U.S. intelligence community's assessment that Russia did, in fact, through cyber warfare, cyber attacks, interfere in the U.S. election process?
I do. This is very indicative of Russia and what they've done to multiple elections across Europe, across the Balkans, all through the area, all around Russia. This has been an issue for them and has been very consistent with what they typically do. They try to destabilize every other country around them by making those countries believe that their election is not real.
Because the president-elect, he's been briefed by U.S. national security experts. He gets these presidential daily briefings, if you will. I think he's had 3 or 4 or 5 of them by now. You saw in the Time magazine interview, he doesn't buy it. He doesn't necessarily think Russia has interfered.
Well, there's 2 different sets of information right now and different rumors that are out there. Whether Russia's reaching in, I have no question about trying to find ways to be able to interfere. There's also this rumor that's out there that Russia was hacking into our election systems and trying to manipulate machines. Absolutely no evidence for that. There's this whole line that continues to go out there saying Russia hacked into our elections, they affected the voting. There is no evidence for that, but that line keeps being repeated. Whether that's what Trump is talking about or whether he's talking about trying to interfere in the election, I don't know.
Because you do believe the Russians were responsible for the hacking of the Democratic National Committee, for the Gmail account of the Hillary Clinton campaign chairman, John Podesta, all those WikiLeaks emails that were released. You believe all of that originated with Russian cyber warfare experts? I
do. And whether those were individuals within Russia or was officially into their government, we don't know. But I do
General
believe
Clapper, the director of national intelligence, says only at the highest levels of the Russian government could this have been authorized.
Right. And so what we're trying to figure out is who is that highest level and how did that function? Again, you're still determining some unknowns in that feature. But I would tell you, I have no question the Russians were engaged in this and trying to release data. And I have no question they were trying to create chaos in our election because they do in every other nation.
But were they trying to help Donald Trump get elected president?
That's the unknown.
Because really all the hacks went against the Democrats, not the Republicans.
Right. So, but we still don't know. Again, in many other elections, they're just trying to create chaos and instability. What they want to do is be able to promote themselves and to make everyone else unstable. Whether they were trying to elect Trump or whether they were trying to just create instability, we don't know that.
Well, thanks very much for coming in.
Thanks.
Appreciate it. Just ahead, we'll have more on President